Okay, so
Last time on Dragon Ball Z.
I said this was going to be a two-part series, but guess what? I lied. And I mean, it ain't like y'all don't pay other people millions of dollars every single day to do the same thing, so shove it. Secondly, before we start the video, be forewarned that the path to my point is going to be extra winding today. So buckle up and put on your patience goggles, because some of y'all have a very bad habit of voicing your displeasure with my point before I even get there. Dumbass. Last time I talked about the origin of street rap and street talk, and why if you're not from the streets, you really shouldn't be talking about bricks and biscuits unless you're just a really, really bad baker. But despite my pleas, I know a lot of y'all are still going to talk like an Urban Dictionary, and that's because street rap today is as much for the OGs doing max bids in the state pen as it is for the JV lacrosse team, perhaps even more so the latter. Because here's the thing. Cousin Ray Ray isn't calling collect every week asking for money to be put on his books for Donda 2 merch and a 12-inch vinyl press of Throat Baby, and that's why it's prison, folks. But you know where they do have that stuff? At the mall, and Walmart, and your neighborhood Urban Outfitter. And if not there, then online. And you know who shops there? Jimothy and Yennefer from AP Calc, that's who. Don't get it twisted, in a country that's only 12% Negro, there's no way that you can even imagine moving as many units as the biggest names in the hip-hop world do without white people consuming your content just as, if not more than, urban blacks. The math just doesn't work. And if you really do ship as many packs as your catalog suggests, you would know that. Trust me, the best accountants I ever met in life were all drug dealers. Some of them legal even. So what this means is a ton of white, and for that matter, black and Latino suburbanites have fallen in love with street life by using hip hop as a proxy. Because let's keep it a buck, y'all. Nas, Jay, and Biggie, these guys are not. So what exactly is their appeal? As much as both underground and mainstream hip-hop love the clown Rainbow Bright over here, the fact of the matter is before he went fed, 6ix9ine managed to move
2 million
units of a single with bars like iffy, Blicky got the stiffy, got the blicky, drum it holds 50, Kodak Black, along with being one of the scariest people I've ever seen, just might be the worst rapper I've ever heard since Michael Scott. This is the guy who once said, make that pussy feeling like it's mac and cheese. And no, I'm not just isolating one bad line for comedic effect. This is the bar for Kodak. Pun originally not, but definitely now intended. Yet, despite his apparent lyrical limitations, the artist affectionately known as Yak to his stands has, at the time of this recording, the #1 album on the Billboard chart. And like 3 weeks ago, had 3 singles in the top 10. Why though? I'm not going to sit here and cap like these kids don't at least have an ear for catchy melodies, but like I said previously, a bump and bass drenched beat alone does not a track make. Or at least it shouldn't. Like I said in the last video, hip-hop is composed of 2 primary elements, beats and bars. This is how guys like Kanye and Dre made names for themselves before ever even picking up a mic. And how people like Hit Boy, Alchemist, and Derringer have become household names among hip-hop heads. That being said, what makes a rapper unique from just about any other musician is also what makes the popularity of some rappers so questionable, in my opinion. Generally speaking, rappers don't sing, dance, or play an instrument when they perform. And this is why. As a result, rappers are almost completely dependent on lyricism as a vehicle for artistry. This is why the best in the business are expected to go above and beyond to pack as many poetic devices as possible in a single bar, let alone verse or even a whole track. This is why I, along with virtually the whole rest of the world, call Nas, if not one of the best lyricists to put pen to pad. Just look at these bars from I Gave You Power off the It Was Written album, for example. Nas uses a gun to illustrate his mindset at that time. He feels like he's being used by the people around him the same way he'd seen guns used in his hood from the time that he was a child. The gun is used to empower its wielder, but not the weapon itself. And most, if not all the times, at the expense of whoever it's aimed at. No one ever bothers to ask the gun if it ever even wants to be used. They just see it as a tool to advance their own interest. And when the tool is no longer of use, it's tossed aside until the next person comes along and abuses its power also. Additionally, Nas speaks of a gun as a literal phallus, something that also historically has been a symbol of virility and power, to draw parallels between how both are used and even abused to empower the user. Allegory, metaphor, personification. You can't tell me this isn't poetry, albeit somewhat crass. I mean, they don't call him Nasty Nas for nothing. Remember how I said Cole had and still has a viable claim to the best rapper alive crown if he wants it? Go listen to his verse on Johnny P's Caddy and then come back here. No, like for real, go like right now. Stop the video, add this to your watch later, and then come back. Don't worry, I'll wait. Okay, now pick your jaw off the floor and tell me that that's not the verse of the year. You can't, because it is. That's because Cole's pen is as lethal as anybody's, past or present. My point being, because most rappers rap and not much else, they're expected to make their point as creatively as possible with wordplay alone. The best like Nas and Cole can leave you unpacking their lines years after they've been laid down, still finding hidden meanings that might have gone over your head the first 100 times you put the track on rotation. So that being said, if you remove everything from Yak's tracks except Yak, what do you have left? And more importantly, aside from his stands, who is actually going to listen to it? Well, if you want an idea, just check out the now infamous XXL freshman class of 2016 cypher featuring none other than Yak and a few other chart toppers like 21 Savage and the Lils, Uzi Vert, and Yachty. I'm not going to play it for copyright reasons, but aside from Denzel Curry, it's garbage. Hot basura, like a week-old 10-gallon trash bag full of colic diapers and throw-up. I've sat in on better ciphers in high school with nothing in the background but some dude banging out the grinding beat on a lunch table. Hell, I've been a part of better ciphers with nothing in the background but some dude banging out the grinding beat on a lunch table. Now, I do have to give Savage his flowers because he has come up a ton since then, but if you told me that in 6 years, out of all these MCs, Kodak would be the one with the strongest claim to the hottest MC in the game crown, frankly, I probably just shrugged my shoulders and went back to playing TPAB on repeat. Now let's be clear for a second. This isn't meant to come off as a back in my day we made rappers memorize a whole thesaurus and then transpose the entire epic of Gilgamesh from memory before even letting them near a microphone thing if it isn't that already, because snap music was the soundtrack of my high school years. And Cameron once said I get computers putin'. So there you have that. But that being said, there's got to be a reason why these guys came out the box hitting home runs on the Billboard charts, while Gibbs, Conway, Jid, Wes, and Benny, who all spit similar content but are just much better at it, are just beginning to get a fraction of the kind of attention that Kodak and Snitch 9 got when they were minors. Well, it's simple. Gibbs, Con, Jid, Wes, and Benny are all grown behind men and have been for a minute now. As far as street life goes, they've been there, done that, and for the most part have moved on. When you hear these guys spit crime bars, for the most part, they're weaving tales about exploits from a lifetime ago, or at the very least, long enough as not to incriminate themselves on an open charge. I don't think that it's a stretch to say that the artists I just mentioned make the hip-hop equivalent of grown folks music. And that buckles and buckets is why, despite, in my opinion, they being more than deserving, I'm not holding my breath to see Griselda dominating the Billboard charts the way Yak is right now. This is because the music industry caters to a younger audience, and marketing to youth is as much about selling an image as it is a product. Don't worry, I'm about halfway to my point at this point. Raise your hand real quick if you know what an industry plant is. Well, I know. Okay then. You ever seen that movie Weird Science? Well, it's basically that, but with record labels and not horny teenage boys. So even hornier middle-aged men. If that reference is too dated for you, It's an artist who presents themselves as someone who developed their sound, image, and thereby fan base organically, who in reality is at least in part the product of millions of dollars worth of tweaks in marketing. You know, you could have just said Billie Eilish and saved me like an hour of editing, boy. Shut up, Clarence. Okay, so Clarence is right to an extent because the definition of a plant has always been sort of nebulous and is especially now in the social media age. You see, most alleged plants build up at least a small buzz around themselves via social media platforms like YouTube and SoundCloud before being discovered by some balding record exec with perpetually underachieving children and an equally unfulfilling sex life that isn't paid for. Everybody with a major label deal has undergone some sort of industry-sponsored refinement in order to make their sound and, more importantly, image as marketable as possible to a mainstream audience with tons of expendable cash burning holes in their pockets. I mean, it's cool if you want to spend your entire life playing juke joints and dive bars for free beers and wings and the occasional one-night stand, but if you're trying to make it to the main stage of the iHeart Music Festival, you're going to have to undergo some version of the Billie Eilish treatment at some point. So let's take a look at one of hip-hop's most infamous plants. Rob Van Ice Suge, Please Don't Drop Me Off the Balcony Winkle. Vanilla Ice epitomizes exactly why nailing down what a plant actually is so hard. According to Hip Hop Madness, Chuck D of Public Enemy fame claimed that Ice had been grinding away in the underground hip hop scene for at least a year or two before getting snatched up by a major label. And Chuck, recognizing that if there was ever going to be a hope for hip hop to break into the cul-de-sacs of white suburbia, Vanilla Ice was going to be it, at least back in the early 90s. The problem was Ice got snatched up by Capitol Records first, who promptly went to work tweaking and refining his image to be as marketable as possible. In other words, just enough street clout to capture the kids' imaginations, but not enough to make mommy and daddy want to bathe them in holy water after listening to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie soundtrack. And I mean, it worked, for a minute at least, because marketers actually know how to do their jobs, believe it or not. But once the novelty of a family-friendly white rapper had worn off, Ice got tossed to the wolves by the very people who made him what he was. And considering that the hip-hop community at large never really wanted anything to do with Ice from the jump, Rob just sort of disappeared from the public consciousness except as parody father and a scapegoat for Eminem haters. And also for the occasional reality show and furniture store commercial. Now, I'm not asserting that any of your favorite street MCs are plants, except Blueface, but y'all don't even listen to him anymore anyway. The only reason I even bring the plant thing up is because music execs get paid to understand something that, for whatever reason, a lot of us don't seem to. And that's that the music business isn't really about selling music. It's about selling an image, a lifestyle even, and in the case of hip-hop, an avatar through which that lifestyle can be experienced. That's the point I want to get at, and I feel like I took way too long in getting there, but it's all water under the dam now anyway. As should have been made clear in part 1, hood life is painful, and the more absorbed in it you are, the more pain you're likely to experience. Some of the best art is made from and through pain. We all know this. And a lot of today's street rappers like Lil Durk and the cult of personality that has become NBA YoungBoy rap just as much about the sorrow that hood life has caused them as the hood itself. And in a genre that's been for the bulk of its history defined by machismo and braggadocio, it is refreshing to see somebody say, you know what? It doesn't always feel good to be a gangster. That being said, what happens when the street kid no longer belongs to the streets and they either mature out of the rage that defined their youth, or they beat the odds and find a way out of the environment, and in some cases behavior that helped mold them into the commodity they've now become? Well, frankly, a lot of people start getting bored with them. That's what history tells us, and that's my problem. Corporate interests dehumanizing people like me who come from where I do because some milquetoast music critic needs something to jolt them from their bubblegum pop induced malaise. Or some cornball cul-de-sac dweller needing a soundtrack for their rebellious phase. Remember what I said about Nas in the first video? Remember how I said Illmatic is universally considered not only the high mark of his career, but one of the most important albums in American music history? You know who doesn't feel that way? Nas doesn't. He doesn't even want to acknowledge Illmatic's existence at this point because everybody who isn't an actual fan of his artistry, critics in particular, keep comparing everything he's done since to that one album. But Nas isn't the same kid who made that album anymore. He's not the desperate little bucko from Queensbridge with nothing to lose and an insatiable hunger for a better life anymore. He's the kid who actually beat the odds and got his golden ticket out of there. He's become not only hip-hop royalty since, but a crossover success and a mainstream icon to boot. In summation, he no longer has the weight of the world on his shoulders, but instead he has it in the palm of his hand. And thus, he doesn't want to talk about the same stuff he did when he was a teenager. And frankly, we shouldn't demand that from him. Like his one-time nemesis once said, "Niggas want my old shit, then buy my old albums." But isn't that just like the privilege? To lock the underclass in a cage and then demand the huddled, unwashed masses dance for their amusement. And then once we finally either pass out from exhaustion or worse, find a way to escape, they just find a new monkey to toss into the gorilla house to point and laugh at. And yes, I'm very well aware of the racial overtones of that analogy, but I'm black, so crisis averted. Unfortunately, though, Nas is in the minority. Most street kids don't get a chance to make it out with or without talent. Data says as much. That's what we mean by becoming a statistic. The American dream may not be a complete lie, but the simple matter of fact is the poorer you are, the harder it is to move upward because the system, despite what Fox News would tell you, is rigged against the underclass for the benefit of the rulers. And that's especially true if you have even a drop of pigmentation in your skin. Like I said in part 1, I was always paranoid of what catching a charge on my record would mean for my future. So though the prospect of making more money in a week at 16 than I do in a year as a 30-year-old man was more tempting to me than a set of braces is to Matt Gaetz, the near inevitability that I would get caught at some point and have virtually no prospects after, but selling even more drugs made me say, nah, bruh, I think I'm a pass. And listen, don't let these studio gangsters fool you. That gang of dudes, literal in some cases, mean mugging and gun toting for the camera in your favorite rapper's video, half of them don't even know whose video they're in. And the other half ain't even about that life to begin with. Because if they were, then they wouldn't even be in the stupid video. And you know why? Because Fifth Amendment, genius, that's why. The harsh reality about the hood is that everyone is a target. And the more successful you are, the bigger the bullseye on your back is. That's why where I grew up, the real gangsters didn't sell drugs. They robbed drug dealers. Because think about it. I can make anywhere from a few $100s to like several racks a day, depending on supply and the weather, from standing outside in the cold, the heat, the rain, the snow, the rapture, whatever, for like 18 hours a day, get robbed, get shot, go to jail or the trifecta, plus no paid sick leave or vacation time. Or I can make the same amount guaranteed, if not more, by just flashing a gun in the first guy's face. That's what we call a bingo. And thus reason number 2 why I never sold drugs. I knew guys who made literal thousands of dollars worth of cash every day from just standing outside, and then they got ripped off. And who are they going to tell? The cops? I mean, you could always just go handle the work yourself, and some people did. But like I said, a lot of guys, or at least the guys I knew, most of them weren't as gangster as they were just young, dumb, and desperate. That's why a real hustler would tell you the second you see a way of escape, get out while the window is still open. Because it's just as likely that the next chance you get will be either in a paddy wagon or a casket. Pop Smoke, King Von, Young Dolph, and Nipsey Hussle are just a few of the lives cut short by the streets in recent years. And unfortunately, so long as nothing is done to address the conditions that led to they being targeted in the first place, this trend of young Black and Latino men dying needlessly will continue. Y'all remember those When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong skits from Chappelle's show? Well, some rappers must not have watched the show because they can't seem to keep their gangster in the booth. Or maybe they fear their clout will diminish with the dreaded rap nigga label, thus jeopardizing their authenticity and thereby their bag. Because you see, hip hop, as mainstream as it's become, is still rooted in the underground. And as is the case with similarly originating genres like metal, punk, even the blues and gospel, authenticity is just as important as artistry, even more so if you're lacking in the latter. Point being, as a street rapper at least, you can get away with reciting bars from your Dr. Seuss book collection so long as you're really about the life you're spitting about. And this, folks, is when the culture vultures swoop in for feeding time. And more often than not, they have more than their fill for a very simple reason. Kids are dumb. I should know. I have too. And believe it or not, I was one at one point. And when I was a kid, I believed cartoons were real. And that Mark Calloway was really a satanic cult priest who had a giant disfigured brother who got fire jutsu powers and the one that killed their parents. Yeah, the 90s were a wild time, man. Now, if y'all remember in the last video, I said hip hop was born not just of black, but black urban culture. I want to emphasize that point because believe it or not, that old 80% of gangster rap consumers are white teen stat that the pearl clutchers at Murdoch Media like to vomit out to discredit the art form. Yeah, that's actually not too far from the truth. Well, depending on what metrics you use. According to data provided to the Wall Street Journal from Marketing Researchers Incorporated, in the years 1995, 1999, and 2001, between 70 and 75% of rap music buyers were whites between the ages of 18 and 34. Now, there are some obvious caveats to relying on 20-year-old data to draw a conclusion on who is actually consuming rap music. Firstly, MRI changed its formula for how it tracks the demographics of music consumers at some point during the mid-aughts. As a result, in 2005, the share of rap music consumed by whites dropped by 10%, according to their own data. So how exactly did MRI's formula change to warrant such a drop? Well, allowing respondents to self-report their race, for one. And just FYI, these women made a whole career out of blackfishing, so take that for what you will. The reason that 10% matters is because if accurate, it means POCs are actually overrepresented in rap music consumption, which then means that black people are primarily responsible for keeping their own art form commercially viable, which, salaikum salam if that be the case. But if the number is closer to 70, which I'm inclined to believe for reasons, that coupled with the fact that rap music now accounts for a little less than a fourth of all music consumption today means that hip hop is just another example of how much more mainstream America loves black culture than it does black people. Unless you're this woman, apparently. But whether hip hop music is being consumed mostly by black or white people is irrelevant to the point I'm really trying to get at. Because surprise, surprise, no one is really buying music anymore. Except middle-aged people, which considering that the Kangal and Coogee generation is like a birthday away from menopause at this point, might serve as part of an explanation for why hip-hop makes up such a large portion of music consumption as compared to years past. But I don't want to go down this rabbit hole any further because we're already way off topic. Let's try to stick with the point. The bulk of music that is bought is by people 45 and up, and the bulk of that is anniversary copies of Appetite for Destruction and Nevermind. Young people usually stream rather than buy music because they're leeches, as anyone with family younger than 24 should know. Furthermore, when they do buy, it's usually a single and not a whole LP. So the question is, why do the bloodsuckers who compose the music industry target children and not the people who are actually buying music? Well, because like I said, kids are dumb, or in PC speak, impressionable. That's because for the most part, our taste in music is pretty much established by the time we reach our 20s. This is why so long as the baby bastard generation is still around and kicking, acts like the Beatles and the Stones will always be among the biggest unit pushers. It's why Tupac releases an album like every other year despite his self-imposed exile in Cuba. Think of it like this. How many times did you wind up embarrassing yourself trying something new you saw on Pornhub with your significant other? Now, how many of those times were before your 25th birthday? Exactly. That's how music works, with exceptions, of course. Young people also usually have a ton less responsibility and therefore much more downtime than us soulless grown folk. Thus, they're much easier to market to, even if just purely based on how much more time they have to be exposed to that marketing. And thus more likely to spend what little disposable income they do have on merch and concert tickets. You know, those things artists practically beg their audience to buy because they're getting pennies on the dollar from actually making music. When you take all these factors into consideration, then you understand why the younglings are the backbone of the music industry, right? And I know the younglings in the audience think that I'm just giving them crap for being younglings, and that's kind of because I am, but both because the data and my own experience backs up what I'm saying. Why do you think Six Flags is always option 1B for every senior skip day when there's too many seagulls and actual seniors at the beach? Why do you think the bulk of Coachella's crowd looks like a high school PE class? Young people tend to value experiences over possessions. Maybe because the younger you are, the less you can afford things worth possessing, but that's not the point. The human brain doesn't complete its development until 25, and it's not exactly the difference between a toddler and a 12-year-old, but it's enough that despite your grandparents' sage advice, you're probably better off not making any really big life decisions like getting married or having a baby before that age. Because trust me, you're not going to be the same person once the clock strikes a quarter century. And this is why Pop Pop hasn't gotten any sloppy tops since the Carter administration. Also, this is why approximately 75% of the worst decisions you'll ever make occur somewhere between your late teens and early 20s. I should know. This is when I chose journalism as a major. But jokes aside, your teens and 20s are all about discovering who you are, your values, your motivations, your personal code of honor and ethics. This period, as much as your single-digit years, is a formative period. But unlike the pre-tween years, young adulthood is less about cognitive and social development than it is self-discovery. Additionally, the adolescent brain is more likely to seek pleasure through thrill seeking and less likely to see risk outweighing reward in decision making. And that's my journalism major. So what exactly is the point I'm trying to make here? That the music industry commodifies hood culture through hip hop music and markets it to teens and young adults in search of themselves and a low risk thrill. The kind you get from tricking your brain into thinking it's in just enough danger to get your adrenal glands working overtime without actually putting yourself in any real harm's way. Not unlike riding in the front car of a roller coaster, or playing Resident Evil with the lights out, or letting your girl lock her ankles around your waist while going in bareback. I mentioned earlier that the new wave of street rappers aren't afraid to bare their scars for all the world to see. And in the process, I mentioned who, in my opinion, embodies this mindset more than any one of his peers, that being Louisiana's NBA YoungBoy. I'm not the biggest YB stan, or one at all for that matter. That being said, I think I understand his appeal and why I can't even share the good news of Jesus Christ without hearing YB better. Young boys are drawn to YoungBoy for the same reason why, when I was 17, I jilted hip-hop for hardcore punk. Black Flag, Bad Brains, Minor Threat. These were bands that spoke to me in a way hip-hop hadn't since George Bush ceased caring about black people. Remember what I said about being street adjacent? Well, a lot of things happened during my pre and teen years that, frankly, I'm not going to get into in this video, but suffice to say, when life begins to imitate art, sometimes you cease finding pleasure in the latter. Well, at least that's how it worked out for me. Point being, for reasons beyond my immediate control, I became a very angry teenager. And if it hadn't been for me discovering and using punk as a release, there's a better than good chance I'd have found a much more destructive vehicle. And God knows there was no shortage of those where I grew up. I've listened to YB's music. Not all, and not even a lot of it. But the first time I heard one of his mixtapes, I couldn't help but be reminded of the first time I heard My War or Holiday in Cambodia. the latter of which was on Guitar Hero, by the way. YB's aggression comes from a place of pain, and in that way, he makes himself vulnerable. And that's rare in a genre characterized by extravagance, bravado, and many, if not most times, exaggeration. Don't get it twisted, we're not talking about Drizzy simping for strippers vulnerable. YB is most definitely about the life he describes in his music, but unlike many who've come before him, he's just as apt to speak on the wounds he suffered as the battles he's fought. Kind of like one of my favorite MCs, DMX. And so I can't hate on YB, even if some of his stands are more delusional than Lobster Man's. Dumbass. I can only imagine that there are a ton of angry and angsty teens and 20-somethings who see YB as an avatar for their rage. And I mean, again, would you rather that or those same kids expressing themselves all over your candy-painted classic Cadillac? So like I've said umpteen times over the course of the last two videos, it's not the art or even the artist I have a problem with. Think about YB and then think about similar artists. Dirt, Lil Baby. Where are they from? Baton Rouge, Southside Chicago, and the Oakland City neighborhood of Atlanta. All places known at least locally, and in Dirk's case nationally, for elevated crime rates. And you want to know why those rates are elevated? I'm really getting tired of using this slide, y'all. As I've said ad nauseum at this point, poverty and not single parenthood, not violent video games, not even skin color, if you could believe it, creates crime. So maybe we should, be creating policy that would address the issues that led to these artists living the lives they rap about in the first place? Or is that too much like right to actually be an option? Or are we just going to keep pointing the finger at rap music every time we decide that addressing the conditions that created it isn't convenient enough to be viable? Because here's the thing. In addition to crime, poverty, especially in childhood, leads to anxiety, depression, and trauma. And that's before you add the extra spicy layer of finding used crack pipes and empty bullet casings in the alley where you play hopscotch. So my question to the YB, Dirk, and Kodak stands in the audience: what will y'all do if and when they grow as artists? And hopefully for their sakes, out of the lifestyles their artistry is founded on. What happens when they decide they're tired of dwelling on the pain and trauma that defined their youth? Will you still flood the comment sections of every BTS music video with chants of YB better? If your favorite hood life avatar suddenly was no longer about that life, and moreover, if their bars changed to reflect that, would you still stand for them? Or would you accuse them or whoever else you choose to exercise your angst of selling out or going soft, like virtually every artist across every genre who decided to change in scenery, situation, and yes, on their bank statement, warranted a change in subject matter? See, I know it's hard for us little people to even fathom that someone with 6 figures plus in their bank account is being objectified. And that's why, as a sports fan, there are few people I stand less than fellow sports fans. Except his fans. Dumbass. No one ever looks past the multi-million-dollar contracts given to the athlete in exchange for, practically speaking, selling their autonomy to the team, or more accurately, the team's owner. It's only either when the athlete's contract expires or when they make themselves as big a headache as possible for management that they're able to choose where and with whom to take their talents. And the vast majority don't even stick around their respective league long enough to make such a decision. It's ironic how sports media has conditioned us to crucify athletes for selfishness and disloyalty, for flaking on the same contracts, or just, fulfilling their contract and moving on to the next pasture, when management can either dump that same contract on somebody else or just outright terminate it whenever they feel like it. Now it's not disloyalty, it's just business. And our fanatic devotion to our chosen franchise more often than not leads us to align with the exploiter rather than the exploitee. Regardless of how high the laborer's wage is, at the end of the day, is still a wage, and therefore won't ever come near to the true value of that labor. Do I think the laborer is always in the right? No. Exhibits A and Ankh. But far too often we let our own shallow interests blind us to the bigger picture, and even cause us to betray our own ideals and even each other for the sake of those interests. I did a whole video on that like a month ago, so y'all can go look at that whenever. This was a necessary tangent to make the point that fame and fortune doesn't disqualify objectification. The commodification of black rage is a story as old as, well, this country, frankly. The only difference between now and 100 years ago is that it's no longer presented as something to be feared. Now it's marketed as something to be experienced. Well, I mean, old habits do die hard, don't they? My point is, the music industry and every industry within a capitalist economic system, for that matter, commodifies whatever the public creates a market for. So what exactly are you saying, Billiam? I'm saying that there would be no reason for corporate interests to commodify black rage and, for that matter, black bodies, sexuality, culture, and language if society didn't demand it.
But Billiam, it's what you people wanted in the first place.
First of all. Secondly, no, that's not what we meant by representation. Like I said in the last video, when you readily consume product without so much as acknowledging its cultural origins, you become an appropriator. But much worse than that, when you consume that product directly at the expense of the producer, while failing to acknowledge, let alone address the societal factors that motivated the producer to produce the product in the first place, you're not just an appropriator now, but you're an objectifier and thereby a dehumanizer. One thing I get sick to death of seeing is non-blacks poke out their chests and declare that drawing attention to such realities does more harm than good and divides the working class that, historically speaking, was never united in the first place except when doing so aligned with the interests of the white portion of it. And frankly, this is why I hesitate to self-identify with any ideology besides the Gospels. The fact of the matter is, we're so far gone from the point of race being a means to an end that race must be viewed as an end in itself if we're ever going to make things right by all this country's, let alone world's people. What I mean is, you can miss me with all that class warfare BS if you honestly believe that white society doesn't see a rich as Nick first and rich second. Sadly, even when it's your own people, because there's mountains of data that says so. And no, one article from one website I've never heard of is going to change that data, and better yet, a lifetime's worth of experience. Dumbass.